The snow didn't fall so much as it settled. Slow, soundless, like ash over an old memory no one spoke of anymore. Jean Bellwether stood beneath the rusting tin awning of the station platform, boots soaked, hands clutched around the handle of a worn carpetbag that once belonged to her mother. The wind didn't just sting her cheeks, it accused her, like the eyes behind lace curtains and murmurs behind gloved hands had done all morning. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She'd told herself she wouldn't, not in public, not again. Not since the Bellwether matron had shut the door on her face with the words, "You're not our responsibility." And then the sharper cut. "Not after what people say." The train she'd arrived on hissed as it pulled away, its black iron spine shrinking into whiteness. No one had come for her. She was a widow at 20, a bride for only 63 days before pneumonia had carried her husband away in a coughing fit of sweat and prayers. Now, with his grave barely settled under a crooked wooden cross, the town had decided she was either cursed or corrupt. Probably both. Some girls return home. But her home was long sold, her father buried, and her letters unanswered. She had no dowry left, no letters of reference. Just a beauty that no longer earned her admiration, only suspicion. And now, she had nowhere to go. The station platform groaned as someone approached, heavy footfalls pressing down on old wood. She didn't look up at first. She expected another gawking glance, another bite of small-town pity. But the silence was different this time. Not cruel, just still. She finally raised her eyes. He stood like a statue carved from dark earth and bone. Towering, bare-chested despite the snow, with a wolf pelt cloak draped across his shoulders, and hair tied in long black braids down his back. Scars threaded across his ribs like old fire trails. His eyes were obsidian dark, set beneath thick brows, unreadable as canyon walls. He wasn't white. Nor fully native. Comanche, by the shape of his face. His silence was not from awkwardness. It was something older. Earned. Behind her, a woman gasped. "That's Hawthorne." A murmur rippled through the cluster of townsfolk lingering on the platform, half freezing, half curious. Jean held her ground, though her knees betrayed her, trembling under her skirts. She should have looked away. She should have braced herself for insult or order. Instead he said, quiet and low but not unkind, "I need a woman. And you need a home." The words fell like axe blows on silence. So clean. So shameless. Heat flared in her cheeks, shame crawling up her throat like wildfire. Heads turned. She heard a woman mutter something about scandal and desperation. A man spat and chuckled. The station master shifted uncomfortably, tapping his ledger with fake purpose. Jean could barely breathe. She stared at the giant man before her, uncertain if he meant to offend or offer salvation. She couldn't tell. He wasn't leering. His voice hadn't been cruel. Just certain. And what made it worse, what made her furious with herself, was that part of her felt relief. A shameful, aching relief that someone, anyone, had seen her. She should have said no. Should have spit on the snow and walked the other way. But where? To the next town? In this weather? Instead she stood there, heart loud in her chest, hands trembling against the carpetbag. "I don't know you," she whispered, unsure if it was defiance or confession. "You will," he replied simply. The words had no poetry. No flowers, no empty promises. Just granite certainty. She looked at his bare feet in worn deerskin moccasins, the snow steaming off his shoulders. He didn't seem cold. He didn't seem anything, except still. Someone behind her laughed. Sharp, jeering. "Looks like the widow's found her kind." That did it. Jean turned, boots crunching against the icy platform. She walked toward the man without a word, without a glance back. She climbed up behind him on his horse, a quiet brown mare who barely stirred at her weight. The whispers rose like wind. He did not reach for her. Didn't touch her waist. Just let her settle behind him, letting the wolf cloak fall halfway around her shoulders, offering silent warmth. She buried her face into the fur and whispered, "Don't make me regret this." "I won't," he said. And with that, the horse stepped off the platform into snow so white it blinded. The wind swallowed the station. The town. The past. She did not cry. But as she looked back one last time, she saw the station growing smaller. No one waving, no one calling her name. Just snow, and the faces of those who had already decided what she was. They rode without speaking. The snowfall thickened, painting the world into grayscale. Her skirts soaked through. Her fingers, stiff and numb, curled tighter into the cloak. He did not speak or slow, though he noticed. She felt him shift, adjusting the cloak to cover her hands. At dusk, they crossed a river frozen with silence. Deer watched from the trees. The horse's breath steamed. A hawk circled above them, its wings cutting the clouds. By nightfall, they reached a narrow trail that curved into the forest. No signposts. Just memory and instinct. "Do you live alone?" she asked, voice barely above the wind. "Yes." "No wife before?" "No." "Why me?" A long pause. Then, "You were the only one not afraid to meet my eyes." That silenced her more than cruelty ever could have. When they reached the clearing, his lodge came into view, a rough-hewn cabin made of river stones and thick pine logs, smoke rising in a thread from the chimney. Not large, not grand, but solid. Alive. He dismounted first. Reached a hand toward her. Jean stared at it for a long breath. Then took it. Inside, the warmth hit her like a soft punch. Firelight flickered across walls lined with tools, woven blankets, and antlers mounted like silent witnesses. A single table. 2 stools. One bed tucked behind a curtain of hanging pelts. He placed her bag down gently. Removed his cloak and hung it by the fire. Then he left the room, returning moments later with dried meat and a clay cup of heated water. She took them in silence. Ate slowly. Her hands stopped shaking. He sat across from her on the floor, legs folded, eyes cast toward the fire. Not watching her. Just waiting. "I don't owe you anything," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "You don't." The silence between them grew thick, but not hostile. Like snowfall before dawn. Hesitant. Heavy with things unsaid. She looked at him, really looked. His hands were calloused, knuckles scarred. Not a man of softness. But his stillness was not empty. It was restraint. The fire cracked. "I'm tired," she whispered. He stood, walked to the bed, and stripped the top layer of furs. He laid them on a bed of cedar branches near the fire. "For you." She looked at the spot, then at him. Then nodded. As she lay down, curled into warmth not her own, she heard him stoke the fire one last time. Then, without a word, he sat near the door, wrapped in his own cloak, staring out into the snow through a narrow crack in the wood. She watched him for a while, her breath slowing. Somewhere beyond that snow-covered silence, the town was likely already spinning stories. Already deciding how far she had fallen. But here in this rough cabin, wrapped in fur and quiet, Jean did not feel fallen. She felt something else. Not safe. Not yet. But seen. And that might be the beginning of home. Snow melted in slow drops off the cabin's eaves, pattering like distant thoughts. Inside, the fire lived quietly, not roaring but steady, like the man who kept it going. Jean woke to the scent of cedar and roasted meat, her limbs wrapped in warmth not entirely her own doing. The bed of pelts beneath her was soft, almost reverent, arranged with care. The wooden bowl beside her steamed faintly, filled with a thick stew, roots and bone-rich broth. She sat up slowly, every bone still cautious, still braced for a different kind of morning. A cold one. A cruel one. But instead there was just Hawthorne, kneeling near the hearth, shaping an arrowhead with a stone tool and a patience that seemed too ancient to belong to this moment. He didn't glance over. Didn't offer greeting or smile. Just let her see him as he was, working, silent, warm as the fire he kept alive. She cleared her throat. "I didn't expect stew." He set the flint down. "You didn't eat much yesterday." "I don't usually accept charity." That wasn't charity. He didn't explain what it was instead. She didn't ask. Later, she folded the furs and tidied her corner, then began sweeping ashes from the hearth, looking for something to do with her hands. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't stop her. By midday, the wind outside screamed. The fire flickered but held. He brought in more wood, stacked neat, bark flaking in his palms. His chest still bare beneath the fur-lined coat, steam rising from his skin. "Why don't you wear a shirt?" she asked suddenly, too cold and tired to be polite. His eyes flicked to her, unreadable. "It helps me feel alive." She wanted to scoff but didn't. Something in his tone, half dare, half memory, held her back. He began carving again, this time into a piece of softwood. His hands shaped a mother wolf, her head low, flanked by two smaller cubs. It was clumsy at first, then graceful. Intentional. "You're good with your hands," she said, sitting closer to the fire, her knees drawn under her skirt. He shrugged. "I used to carve for trade. Then for memory." "Memory of what?" He didn't answer. Just kept carving. She didn't press. Something in her knew the silence was not absence, but protection. The words would come, or they wouldn't. But they were not owed. They fell into a rhythm, not harmony, not yet, but a shared air. She cooked in the mornings, quiet hands slicing roots and stirring pot. He hunted at dawn, returning with squirrels, once a rabbit, once even a wild turkey that seemed to humble him, as if he'd been granted a prize he didn't ask for. They didn't speak much, but their silences grew less sharp. In them lived small understandings. How he noticed when her hands trembled and silently refilled the firewood. How she left a cup of warm broth on his side of the table when he came in shivering. No degiations. Just gestures. One evening, her feet gave out. She had gone to fetch snowmelt, and the cold cut through her worn boots like knives. She limped in, white-faced, refusing to cry. He said nothing, just pulled a basin near the fire and poured warm water. She tried to protest, but her voice broke. He knelt, lifted her foot, and placed it gently in the water. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he said. He wrapped her feet in pelts, rubbed warmth back into her soles, slow and respectful. She looked away, not from shame, but from something worse, the ache of being seen with no demands. When she finally looked at him, his brow was furrowed. Not with pity, but care. He spoke then, voice low. "A man once told me kindness is louder than fire, but quieter than footsteps. I never forgot that." She blinked. "Who was he?" "My uncle. He raised me a while. Then the war came. He didn't come back." Her lips parted, but no words came. So she laid a hand on his shoulder instead. Just that. Just long enough. Days passed, then weeks. Snow buried the woods in layers. One morning, the roof groaned from weight, and he climbed up to clear it. She watched from below, arms crossed, muttering, "Fool's going to fall." He didn't. But when he came down, brushing snow from his shoulders, he found her smiling. It startled him. She wasn't sure she'd smiled in a year. The rhythm deepened. She began stitching a torn blanket, humming sometimes. He caught a fish and left it by her basin with no note. She began lighting the fire before he returned at night. He began carving little animals, sly foxes, strong deer, and left them near her sleeping corner. One evening, she noticed he was staring at her hands as she worked. Not in hunger, not in claim. Just wondering. "You have good hands," he said. She looked up, stunned. Thank you. I see strength in them." She stared at her fingers, nicked, red, still trembling sometimes. "No one's ever called them strong. They haven't watched you carry shame and still light a fire." The words cracked something open. She turned her head, blinking fast. "Why are you like this?" "Like what?" "So decent." His expression didn't shift. "Because the world wasn't. And someone has to stop the cycle." Silence again, but not empty. Then came the letter. A mail rider arrived, wrapped in fur and frost. Jean had been out feeding chickens Hawthorne had brought home 2 days earlier. The rider, seeing her, handed her the folded envelope. Her name, Jean Bellwether, written in an unfamiliar, sharp script. She opened it in the cabin, hands shaking. Inside, the words bled cold. "Return at once." Your name is still whispered. He cannot keep you. They will come. There was no signature. Just a seal from the Bellwether family crest. Hawthorne read it once, then twice. His jaw did not clench. His voice did not rise. Instead he said, "Do you want to go back?" "No," she said too quickly. Then slower. "But I don't want them to come here either." "They may." "I don't care." "You should." "I don't," she whispered. She stood, took the letter and fed it to the fire. It curled, cracked, and vanished in flame. He watched her do it. Said nothing. But that night, he laid an extra blanket near her corner, though she hadn't asked. The next day, the sky split open with wind. A snowstorm came, howling like it carried every cruel word ever spoken to her. They rationed. He offered her the last bit of honey. She declined. He left it anyway. By firelight, she watched him sew the sole of her boot. She reached out, tracing the jagged scar across his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Was it from battle? No, he said. It was from running. Running from what? From becoming what they said I would be. She swallowed. You didn't become it. Not yet, he said. Outside, the wind screamed harder. But inside, two strangers sat close. No promises, no names for what they were becoming. She reached over and laid a blanket over his shoulders as he sat by the fire. He looked at her hand, then at her. It was the first time she saw his expression soften. He didn't smile, but he closed his eyes. And in that one gesture she knew. She was not unwanted. Not here. Not anymore. The fire between them burned low but sure. By the third thaw, the snow no longer creaked beneath their boots. It sighed, giving way to softened ground and hidden roots, the beginnings of spring whispering in the earth before the trees dared believe it. Jean had begun to hum again. Not loud. Not often. But sometimes, when she stirred the pot or folded pelts or scrubbed the wash basin, a thread of melody would slip from her lips like something forgotten and almost lost. She didn't know she did it. But he did. Hawthorne never said anything about it. Just paused what he was doing for half a breath, as if listening to something sacred, then continued carving or sharpening blades or preparing the next hunt. He didn't need to name it. The sound belonged to no one. Like birdsong. Or firelight. She had found a rhythm here, where no one watched and no one whispered. Her hair, once pinned and fussed into shape for town socials, now tumbled freely down her back, thick and dark like the river. Her hands, though still trembling now and then, were steady with work. She no longer winced when he entered a room, nor flinched at kindness. Trust had not arrived like a visitor. It had crept in, unannounced, through open doors. One morning, as the sun cracked across the frost-crusted field, Jean leaned against the fence post while he tied back the saddlebags. He was preparing to hunt again, another 2-day trek toward the foothills. She hadn't asked where he went, or how far. But he always returned with game, sometimes a story, and once a carved rabbit she kept by her bedroll. You don't have to bring me things, she'd told him. I don't bring them for you, he'd said, not quite looking at her. Oh. I bring them for the girl who used to cry when no one was looking. She didn't answer. But she never left that rabbit behind. Now, as he tightened the straps, she reached into her skirt pocket and pulled out something small. A green ribbon, faded, wrinkled, but still the color of spring grass. It had been tucked in the lining of her coat since the station. A piece of her mother's sewing box, perhaps, or a forgotten relic. She couldn't remember any more. She held it out. I thought you might find a use for it. He took it without speaking, rubbed it between two fingers, then tied it around the hilt of his knife. No thanks. No explanation. But the way he looped it, careful, exact, was more than enough. When he left that day, she didn't feel abandoned. Just aware of the quiet in a way she hadn't been before. While he was gone, she did not wait idly. She built. She cleaned. She found an old iron skillet buried beneath furs and scrubbed it back to use. She drew water from the creek herself, even though the path was steep. She tended the fire like it was something living, because it was. She didn't cry. Not once. And when he returned, mud up to his knees, a deer across his shoulders, and eyes tired but whole, she met him with a pot of stew already warming and fresh cedar branches on the floor. He didn't say, "I'm back." She didn't say, "I missed you." But as they sat across from each other that night, eating in silence, she realized something startling. She wasn't lonely anymore. Not here. Not with him. Later that evening, she asked him a question she'd been circling for weeks. "Why did you really come to the station that day?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the fire, the knife at his belt, the green ribbon now darkened by ash and handling. "I had a dream," he said at last. 3 nights in a row. A woman standing in snow, holding a bag, looking like she was about to disappear. She stiffened. "You're saying you saw me in a dream?" "I'm saying I saw someone who needed what I had. And I needed to give it." She turned those words over in her mouth like a coin. "What is it you think you had to give?" He looked at her then, not through her, but into her. Not like a man who wanted something, but like a man who had once wanted nothing and learned the value of something instead. A place to stop running. She swallowed hard. Later, by firelight, she noticed something carved into the wall just behind his sleeping furs. She'd seen it before, but never close. 3 lines. A wide river, a wolf above it, and 2 small circles beneath. "You're carving," she murmured. He followed her gaze. "It's my family. I thought they were gone." "They are." A pause. "But this house," she said. "This place, you live like you're waiting." He turned back to the fire, face unreadable. "Maybe I am." The next morning brought trouble in the form of a distant voice and a glint of brass. Jean was outside, hanging herbs to dry, when the riders appeared. 2 men in town coats, long rifles strapped behind them, and a letter in hand. One of them, a pink-cheeked boy who looked like he'd never missed a supper, smirked when he saw her. "You're a hard woman to find, Mrs. Bellwether." She didn't answer. Her hands trembled, but she didn't show it. She stepped between them and the cabin. The older man, sterner, held out the envelope. "From your late husband's kin. They're requesting you return for matters of inheritance and reputation." Jean stared at the paper like it carried disease. "Why now?" she asked. "They say you've been taken. Stolen." She almost laughed. "Does it look like I was taken?" The man didn't blink. "You'll have to answer to the law if you don't return." The threat hung like smoke. Just then, the door opened. Hawthorne stepped out, slow, steady. His height made them blink. The wolf cloak framed his shoulders, and the green ribbon fluttered from his knife like spring rising from winter. He said nothing. The riders stiffened. The younger one fumbled his rifle strap. "She's not held here," Hawthorne said. "She is free to leave." Jean turned to him, suddenly uncertain. Was he giving her a way out? "Do you want me to go?" She whispered. His answer was a slow shake of the head. "I want you to choose." And she did. She stepped forward, took the envelope from the man's hand, and tore it straight down the middle. The pieces fell like feathers to the earth. "You can tell them I'm dead," she said. "Tell them the woman they threw away didn't make it through the snow." The older rider narrowed his eyes. "That's a bold thing to say." "No," Jean replied. "It's the truest thing I've ever said." The men turned without a word, their horses kicking up frozen dust as they rode off. She stood there long after the hoofbeats faded. When she turned, Hawthorne had gone inside. The door was left open. That night, they didn't speak. But she sat closer to him by the fire than she ever had before. Their shoulders brushed. He didn't pull away. And when she leaned her head against his arm, just for a moment, he let it rest there. Where no one watched. Where no one judged. Where silence wasn't loneliness, but belonging. And where, for the first time in her life, Jean Bellwether understood what it meant to choose. Quietly, fiercely, without needing to explain herself to anyone. Not even him. The thaw came fast that year, faster than either of them expected. One morning, Jean stepped outside and heard water. Not from the pump or basin, but from the woods themselves. The quiet drip of icicles surrendering, the gurgle of creeks waking from sleep. Snow retreated in streaks, revealing patches of muddy earth and the fragile green of promise. Spring had arrived. And with it came memory. And pressure. She began to pace more. Her hands, once content in daily rhythm, now fidgeted, smoothing hems that didn't need smoothing, folding linens twice over. Something inside her stirred. Not dissatisfaction, but the old voice. The voice of town walls, social mirrors, all the expectations she'd buried in snow and silence. The mail came again, this time from a cousin. A woman she once played dolls with before war and marriage. The envelope was softer. The ink careful. The words filled with concern. The bellwethers had softened, the cousin wrote. Jean's name was being spoken again, gently this time. A few older ladies had asked after her. There were rumors of a small inheritance left improperly processed. Maybe she ought to return, just for a season. Just to set things right. She read it 3 times by lamplight, her back to the fire. When she looked up, Hawthorne was watching her from across the room, his carving blade resting in his palm, the wolf figurine unfinished. "You can go if you want to," he said. She didn't answer. "I won't stop you." The words didn't feel cruel. Just hollow. She set the letter down and stood. "It's not that simple." He gave a quiet nod, then returned to his carving. The rhythm was gone. The room didn't breathe the same. They spent that evening together, but apart. She lay with her back turned to him. He stayed near the fire long after she slept, carving until his fingers ached. The next morning, she packed quietly, just a few things. Her coat, the green ribbon, her mother's brooch. She folded the rabbit carving into cloth and tucked it deep into her satchel. She didn't know why she was going. Only that she had to. Something about the past had reached out with open hands, and she needed to see what, if anything, remained in its grasp. Hawthorne saddled the horse without a word. When she came outside, her heart caught in her throat. He braided her name into the horse's reins with small threads of wildgrass. Not boldly. Not to be seen. Just there if one looked close. "You don't have to take me," she said. "I know," he replied. The ride into town was quiet. The world had shifted color again. Soft greens blooming beside the browns, trees budding cautiously. The land itself was daring to trust again. They reached the edge of town by sundown. She dismounted. He handed her the satchel. No embrace. No farewell. Just stillness. "I'll come back," she said, unsure if it was a vow or a hope. He nodded. "I know." Then she turned. The first thing she noticed was the eyes. People peering from windows, children pausing their games. The whisper of her name trailed behind her like a veil. Jean Bellwether had returned. Alone. Her cousin greeted her warmly, with arms and perfume and tea already steeping. They sat by a fire that didn't crack like Hawthorne's did, in a parlor that smelled of polish and too much rosewater. "You look strong," her cousin said, trying to smile. "Different." Jean simply nodded. The house was soft, the bed warmer than she needed. The clothes pressed and smelling of starch. But at night, the walls whispered louder than any forest. And the fire didn't speak. It merely burned. They introduced her to suitors. A banker's son, timid, polite, with soft hands and a tight smile. A preacher's brother, kind enough, but speaking too quickly, like trying to cover up an ache he didn't know he carried. They never asked her about the winter. They never mentioned the carving she wore on a cord around her neck, hidden beneath her blouse. Days passed like they were being borrowed from someone else's life. One evening, while walking home from market, a child tugged her skirt. A town boy, cheeks smudged, eyes wide. "He came yesterday," the boy said. "Who?" "The man. The big one. Bare chest. Like a bear." Jean's heart stopped. "He left something," the boy added, pulling a small object from his coat. A wooden wolf, tail curled, standing guard. She took it with shaking fingers. That night, she did not sleep. At dawn, she dressed in old boots and her patched coat. She didn't pack much. Just enough. Left a note by the cousin's door. "I had to choose between comfort and truth. I choose the fire." She walked. Through mud, across thawing rivers, past fields still drowsy with frost. Her feet blistered. Her hands bled from thorns. Her scarf caught on a branch and fluttered away like something released. But she kept walking. Toward the memory of a fire that had never judged her. Toward a man who had offered silence as safety. Toward a cabin that smelled of cedar and truth. When she reached the clearing, her breath caught. The smoke was rising. Thin and gray. Steady. He was there. Standing just beyond the porch, bare arms crossed, cloak still thick across his shoulders, as if he'd never moved. As if he had been waiting the whole time. She stumbled once, then again. He stepped forward, but did not rush her. When she reached him, she collapsed. Not from weakness but surrender. He caught her gently, holding her upright, his arms steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his chest. He didn't reply. Just held her. One hand behind her head. One at her spine. Later, inside, he lit the fire and fed her stew. Laid out warm blankets and mended her boots in silence. She did not speak much. But her eyes didn't leave him. "I came back," she said, as the wind shifted outside. "I know," he murmured. The world had tried to name her. Tried to shame her. Tried to fold her back into the box of who she had been. But Jean Bellwether had walked back to where no one watched. And in the silence of that return, something holy stirred between them. No degiantion, no kiss, no claim. Just a waiting man. And a woman who finally understood that she had not been stolen. She had been chosen. And she had chosen too. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. There were no apologies to untangle, no rehashing of choices already paid for in footsteps and frostbite. Jean rose each morning with the fire already lit, her hands moving without hesitation. The cabin was smaller than she remembered, but warmer too, as though the air itself had decided to believe in second chances. Hawthorne never asked where she'd gone, or why she had returned. He only brought her tea made from river mint and berries she'd once said reminded her of childhood. He cut new wood without her asking. And when she burned a biscuit by mistake, he ate it anyway and didn't flinch. One morning, she touched his braid as he sat at the table and asked, "Will you ever leave this place?" He looked at her with the patience of a man who understood the ache in her question. "I already did," he said. "Once. That was enough." She never asked what that meant. She didn't need to. There were stories in his scars, but they weren't for naming. They were for holding. By mid-spring, the cabin pulsed with a life that wasn't loud, but constant. Like a heartbeat under fur. They planted a small garden. She carved spoons and hung herbs above the door. He built a stool just her height, so she wouldn't have to stand on her toes to hang the laundry string. She painted the wolf carving with ash and crushed berries, and set it beside the fire where it watched over them like an old sentinel. At night, she began to read aloud. Books left behind by an old trader. Tales of stars and maps and long-lost kings. Hawthorne listened, sometimes with eyes closed, sometimes with his chin resting on his hand. But always present. Always still. She had never known what it meant to be listened to like that. They were never lovers in the way town tongues might imagine. Not at first. Not in any hurry. Their intimacy lived in the thousand little things. The way he touched her back when she bent to stoke the fire. The way she smoothed the edge of his collar after washing it. The way they both looked at the door before sleep, as if silently agreeing it would stay shut to the world outside. But peace is rarely allowed to live long without being tested. It began with hoofbeats. Far off. Dull at first, then louder. Thundering. Not one rider. Many. Hawthorne rose before the dust reached the clearing. He stepped out onto the porch as the first riders appeared. Sheriff's men. 5 of them. One wore the gold trim of county office. Another bore the white sash of federal jurisdiction. Behind them, a 6th figure dismounted slowly. Bellwether. The cousin's husband. He had the look of a man who believed in consequence but not compassion. Jean stepped beside Hawthorne, her hand brushing his sleeve. The county man spoke first. "Jean Bellwether, you are ordered by the authority of the state to answer for your withdrawal of assets left in the Bellwether estate." She stared at them all, her chin high. The inheritance was mine. And I returned it. That's not how the story's being told. Stories change. Bellwether stepped forward. You left my wife a note. You didn't come back. You disappeared. I found a place where I was whole, she said. She is not held here, Hawthorne said, voice low and even. She came on her own. She can leave on her own. That's not the question anymore, said the man with the sash. This is about protection of reputation. Yours. And the state's. Jean laughed softly. It was not a sound of humor, but disbelief. I was thrown away. Now you're afraid I made something good from it. One of the riders raised his rifle slightly. The law still applies, miss. Regardless of sentiment. Hawthorne moved then. Not toward them, but beside Jean. His hand came up slowly, palm outward. Not in threat, but in stand. You will not take her, he said. And what will you do? The sheriff asked. Fight all of us? Hawthorne said nothing. Then Jean stepped forward. No, she said. You'll leave. You'll go back and tell them I am not yours. I am not property. I was broken, but I rebuilt myself in a home you never looked for. And if you try to drag me from it, you will find the fire I became. Bellwether opened his mouth, but something in her face, some fierce, glowing defiance, made him stop. The wind rustled. A hawk cried overhead. Somewhere in the woods, wolves stirred. The sheriff's men didn't dismount. They looked at each other, unease spreading like ink. Finally, the county man grunted. She isn't a prisoner. And no law broken. He turned his horse. The others followed. But Bellwether remained a moment longer. His eyes scanned the cabin, the tools, the hand-carved figures by the window. His jaw tensed. She was born to better, he muttered. Then he too rode off. The silence afterward was thick. Not fearful. Just full. Hawthorne turned to Jean. You spoke truer than I ever could. I learned from you, she said. That night, they burned the rest of the letters. Every piece of paper that ever bore her name written by someone else's hand. She watched them blacken, curl and disappear. And then, without fanfare, he reached for her hand. They stood before the fire, and he asked with no ring, no preacher, no crowd. Will you stay, for always? She nodded. And that was all the vow either of them needed. Seasons turned. They built more, another room, a cradle one day. A trail of stones leading to the creek. They taught each other how to plant in rhythm with the moon, how to laugh without hiding the teeth. And in the years to come, children came. First a boy with her eyes and his silence, then a girl who danced like flames and sang like sparrows. The town spoke less and less of Jean Bellwether. Some said she died. Some whispered she'd been taken. But those who saw her at market, tall, smiling, child on hip, spoke of a woman re-rooted, wilder and stronger than ever before. As for Hawthorne, few dared speak his name now. Not from fear, but reverence. Like naming a river that runs too deep to map. One winter night, with snow settling again like memory across the earth, Jean stood on the porch wrapped in a fur-lined shawl. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve, asking for another song. Behind her, Hawthorne stepped outside, wrapping his arms around both of them. The stars above blinked cold and ancient. Below them, the fire in the hearth crackled steady and bright. Sometimes, the world tried to name them. To box them. To rewrite them. But they had built something no wind could scatter. No town could shame. No law could undo. A home not made of boards or names, but of hands offered, pain honored, and love that asked nothing but to be returned. And the fire they built could not be put out.